Hello, friends. Lee Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with four-time New York Times bestselling author Jen Hatmaker on her new book, Awake, a memoir of recovery and reinvention. I always find myself consistently grateful for all of the beautiful human beings we get to interview on No Small Endeavor. And then there are, on occasion, particular interviews that especially stand out in my mind as especially noteworthy, and this is one of those especially noteworthy interviews, I think. A vulnerable, difficult, painful sort of conversation that Jen begins her memoir with, devastating loss, and then the way in which she began to try to rework, and re-envision, begin again with her life, and the work that she did with herself, on herself. It's a beautiful book, and that I recommend. It's a wonderful conversation, a challenging conversation, at points a difficult conversation, and really lovely. Here's Jen Hatmaker. Enjoy. Jen Hatmaker, hello, welcome.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, grateful to have you with us. I'm wondering if for some of our audience that might not know your work, how would you describe the work that you've done over the last 20 years to those who don't know
Gosh. I've had a bit of a evolving career, probably like most of us have. If you've got to compile 20 years of work, if I were just going to put a large banner over what I've done for 20 years, I'm an author. That's probably the lead horse in my race. I've written, I'm not honestly sure, 14 or 15 books. And that was always what I wanted to do. That's what I set out to do. And then in today's modern age, if you're a writer, people are like, well, can you come speak at our thing? And I'm like, do you think I can? Did somebody tell you that I could? I don't know. So I developed the muscle of being a speaker alongside my writing career. And then I also, I've got a podcast that's almost 8 years old, and that has been just a real delight. And so by and large, I lead a large community of women, primarily online. That's sort of where our gathering space is. And I had my comeuppance in the first half of my career in, I guess, what would be considered evangelical women's subculture. That is a thing. And as my faith evolved, as my ideologies evolved, as I grew older and up, my influence has expanded, and it's broader than that now. And I still include some faith elements, but I also just talk about women and our lives and what it means to live in agency and emotional and relational health. That's kind of the brunt of what I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
you.
lot.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a mouthful.
So your new memoir, Awake, begins with a very difficult opening page. Would you describe that for us?
Certainly. I was married for 26 years. Got married when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college. And my ex-husband and I built a whole life. And we have 5 kids, 3 biological, 2 adopted. He was a pastor, church planters, the whole thing. And in July of 2020, so it's been just 5 years, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard him in bed next to me voice texting his girlfriend. And that's how I start the book. Those are the first two sentences. And as I wrote, it was the end of my life as I knew it. And it was. And so that was a before and after. And this book it's both the before and the after. I write about that process of like grief and suffering and trauma, and then ultimately healing and rebuilding. But I also look at before, and because I decided to take a pretty candid look at the systems that I have been a part of, that I've been handed, the narratives I've been handed my whole life that built that house. And so I decided to look at those brick by brick by brick. And to be honest, just concluded that maybe it wasn't such a surprise that the house crumbled after all. So that is sort of the scope of the book. So yes, it is my little story nestled inside a bigger story in which on one level or another, I think almost every woman around my age will be able to identify with.
Yeah, I found it moving and beautiful and transparent and honest, and
thank you.
And in ways that your transparency and honesty are not always comfortable. It couldn't have always been comfortable for you, and it's a sort of transparency that I think that invites the reader to ask some questions maybe that they might have been reticent to ask. And so I think it's a beautiful book, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. It's a really nice thing to say.
Early on, you say that it's one of those early chapters that kind of the first thing that you do is call an attorney. And you said that that was your intuition, and you just followed your intuition. And you kind of leave this hint that there's much more to be said about that at that point you didn't investigate why you followed your intuition rather than calling, and I would have supposed in this mind, calling the church or calling your friends at church or whatever, but you call the attorney. And that I think sets up this one theme, one thread that runs throughout, is this learning to pay attention to the body and learning to pay attention to intuition. So, but maybe first, could you set up for us, why do you think for you there is this lack of trust in intuition, or this lack of trust in the body?
That's a real through line in the story, is reinventing my relationship with my own body, including my own intuition and wisdom and gut. I was raised in a really traditional, conservative, religious space. I kind of came up, for those of your listeners who know, through the Southern Baptist world. My dad was on staff. My dad was a very rogue pastor. But
it's a very lovely picture of your dad in the book. Yes.
Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah.
Like I really honestly have the best parents, but that was my faith environment. And in that world, particularly coming up through the 80s, 90s, I was taught that my body, my feelings, my perception, my desires were fully untrustworthy, that I was absolutely not a reliable source of authority in my own life. In fact, we were taught overtly to outsource all of our authority. So it was up to everybody else to tell us what to do, how to act, what to believe, how to live. In fact, we were sort of taught to actively distrust our instincts. That if we really wanted something, that should raise a red flag. That could be perceived as worldly or selfish. You know, that is the S word in evangelical upbringing, is being selfish, particularly for girls. Girls are meant to have complete self-erasure in service of everybody else around us. That's That's the role that we were mostly handed, and anything outside of complete servitude and subservience was deemed selfish and self-serving and prideful. That was the P word. And so I believed that. I had a very tumultuous relationship with my own body, including my own instincts. That, when you are told from the time you are in second grade that you are inherently bad and that you are just desperately in need of someone to save you from your own wickedness, that is a worldview that is very hard to reverse. And so when I lost my marriage, and I just could not, I've always used my brain then to just alchemize everything that has ever happened to me. And I'm cerebral in nature. And so, but I couldn't get out of my brain. My brain was a poisonous loop of shock and grief and trauma. And I'd seen things I couldn't unsee, and I just could not escape it. And so for maybe the first time in my life, I went to my body and went, I wonder if my body might be a more gentle guide through this season of life. And so you'll see in the book, as you saw, I had new practices that I put into place. I worked with sort of energy specialists and healers, and acupuncture, meditation, guided meditation became my number one tool to talk me out of being in my head and get me back into my body. And it was a transformative experience. And I'm still learning to experience the world through the trustworthiness of my own body, which is like a whole new day for me.
Yeah. And even the practice of breathing, you mentioned several times, and the beauty of that, which reminded me, years ago, I called a mentor of mine and was in all sorts of emotional distress. And I remember he said, well, the first thing I would suggest to you is to breathe. And I thought, that's what you've got for me? That's all you've got for me?
Golly.
But then
right?
But then in turn I realized, oh my, that was incredible wisdom. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned in Awake, but I'm like, God, even babies know how to breathe. Like, they don't even have to pay to learn it, but here we are.
Yeah.
And this breath work is a genuine way to regulate your central nervous system and to pull you out of a space of panic, which I was in at the time, and to recalibrate the chaos that my brain just couldn't do. So turns out breathing. So everybody get excited.
Yeah.
We're coming at you with some real high level tactics here.
Yeah, one way you summarize in one line some of the stuff that you just said about distrust, you said that you learned, I cannot trust a single thing I think or want. And the way then all of pleasure or desire, they are seen as untrustworthy to be sacrificed. And the way in which that takes this sort of religious form or a pietistic form. And I noticed even that you talk about when you were a young girl journaling, and you would write things like, Jesus, nothing else matters. And then you say at one point, well, wait a second, a lot of stuff else matters. And I think that, I'm confessing here that this will have to be for the unabridged version, not for public radio version. But, I'm thinking about some of the hymns sometimes I hear us sing at church where it uses that kind of language. And I think, that's crazy. All sorts of other stuff matters. And Jesus never talks that way either, right?
That's true.
But I don't know, you want to unpack any of that for us?
Yeah. Yeah. I that's my native tongue. Like, I went to church 3 times a week as a fetus, So the language of the hymns when I was growing up, and then later as an adult, when I was like kind of in cool modern church, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Then the language of the modern praise and worship songs, which is just an updated iteration, really. But they're highly and meant to be highly emotive. They are meant to stir like passion and a heart, and then you get in a room full of people and you have this this group experience. And so worship songs and music can be so highly emotional. But when I was like, wait a minute, if I'm just going to read the words, and I am saying things like with all my heart in the pew on a Sunday, like, I want nothing but you, God. Like, there is no one but you. I don't need anyone or anything but you. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't actually feel that way. And not because I'm a heretic, but like the truth of a human life is that a lot of things matter. And so I just started going, wow, if I'm going to say words to God, I at least want them to be sincere.
Yeah.
Like I suspect he can handle it. I suspect that I can come candid, and that God won't fall out of the sky, And so I think I'm in this season of life where I am taking, I think it's fair to say, a critical look at organized religion in general and all the spokes of the wheel, and go, what feels true to me? What feels meaningful? What feels genuine? Versus what is geared toward an emotional experience and sort of performing faith, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I find myself in a really interesting sort of limbo right now.
Yeah. What would you say in response? I can imagine some people being critical and saying, well, you're setting your feelings over the will of God. What's your response to somebody that might reply like that?
Yeah, I mean, I know all those critiques.
Yeah.
I would almost turn it around, and so I would ask that critic: Are you putting your feelings before the will of God? Is some of the modern response to God swept up in emotive, demonstrative, performative group experiments? Like, are we coming into a room and plugging into an outlet and getting sort of caught up in the thing and then going out into our lives in a different way? Or is it the opposite? And so I'm okay with that criticism, and I can weather that for sure. I think what I'm more interested in is my own faith, not what someone else thinks about it. And so what I crave, I'm 51. And I think what I am craving right now, I'm a lifer. I told you, lifer, pastor's daughter, pastor's wife for 26 years, church planner. I was a pastor, preacher, teacher, Bible study writer. I know the deal. I know all the deals. I know all the language. I know all the rules. I know all the boundaries. I know all the subcultures. And so I don't speak as one who doesn't understand insider language, and insider practices that are expected, if you would like to protect your belonging. Yeah. I know all those. But I just think at this age, I am looking for something that feels absolutely true and sincere. I mentioned this, and you read this because you've read the book, but I read an interview maybe a couple of years ago. So in this season of life where I have felt unmoored a little bit and disoriented around the church, specifically the organized part of religion. And I read an interview with Dr. Dallas Willard, who was an eminent theologian and teacher and a brilliant person and thinker. And the interviewer said, Dr. Willard, if you could describe Jesus using only one word, what would you choose? And his answer was relaxed. And I remember reading that going, what? Relaxed? My God, the God and the Jesus that I grew up with, though they were not relaxed a second of a minute of a day. Like, I was taught that they were tight, that they were fragile, that they were arbitrary, punitive for sure, watching definitely, keeping score 100%. And I was scared. I mean, I had a righteous fear. And when he said relaxed, I'm like, I don't know if I know Jesus right. And so at this stage in my life, I can genuinely say the way that I feel about Jesus is relaxed. And if that means people say, hey, she's just putting her feelings above this, that, or the other, I'm okay. I'll accept that. I'll receive that. Because I feel like what I am discovering now that I have lost what I thought were God's two favorite institutions, marriage, obviously, and now the church, organized religion. And I still feel this connected, centering, gentle, divine presence. That's relaxing. So I no longer feel the need to perform and to hit all my marks like somebody else would like me to.
Yeah, thank you. I think that maybe one way I would summarize what I heard you say there is that in a charge, someone making a critique of yielding to subjectivity, that they may be overlooking their own subjectivity, and that there is no escape of subjectivity in the first place, and that all of us have to come somehow to come to terms with the fact that
there is none.
We all bring our subjectivity, right? Yeah, and that then the question becomes: will we seek to orient our subjectivity?
That's just such an honest thing to say.
Yeah, and that will we then seek to orient our subjectivity towards what we believe to be true? So yeah, thank you for that.
Of course. And every modern person of faith does that, whether or not they're willing to admit that or not. But everyone looks at this ancient text of the Bible and decides to pick which of it they are going to follow. Everyone does that.
You're right.
No one follows it by the letter of the law.
I suspect that it might also be true for every modern person of faith or not, right? That we've come aware in the postmodern world that there's no escaping that kind of element of ourselves, nor even should we want to. Let me ask one more question under body before we move on. And so, if you could give us a few minutes about the way in which the body and patriarchalism plays a role in your book.
Sure, I can speak to that specifically as a woman with a body. Although embodiment certainly is non-gendered. The process of being in touch with our own intuition and wisdom is for every human person. But in terms of being a woman, and this is very layered for me, some of it is certainly gendered in or out of a faith context. The body narrative that I grew up in was incredibly harmful. Everything about our bodies was meant to appease and please and attract men. And of course, that also was a wandering target. It changed by the decade. So, one decade we're supposed to be rail thin, androgynous almost, right? And then the next decade we're supposed to be curvy. And then, of course, I came up through the aerobicized athletic body was the body. And so, but it didn't matter because not only were we expected to fit the mold, but then there's this giant industry going, give us your money and we'll help you get there. We've got the thing that will get you there. The pills or the creams, or it didn't matter. And so I have been thusly at war with my body from the time I was little. I can't remember a time when I thought my body was beautiful, trustworthy, good, meant for good. None of it. I don't think I had a kind thought about my body virtually my entire life. I deemed it a very unfortunate container that was just walking my brain around, and I just tried to like beat it into submission all the time. And so I don't know how men feel. Men are less vocal about the pressure they feel to look a certain way, to have a certain type of. Men say less than women do. I think we're a little bit more vocal about it, primarily because we have been on the receiving end of the majority of the narratives. And so I'm very, very encouraged to watch the next generation. I've got a 25-year-old daughter. I have a 19-year-old daughter. They are so different. They are so different. They have carte blanche rejected diet culture, body shaming, sexual purity culture, which was a huge layer in the way I felt about my body, coming up through my faith space. And this was not just relegated to the Southern Baptist. I think we would have found this in many, many, many subcultures. But, we were instructed that sexual purity was paramount and sex was for marriage and marriage only. And the way in which that was taught to us was absolutely packaged in a great deal of shame and fear. And so baked into the sauce early on was like, whoa, this body can get me in trouble with God, which was terrifying, in trouble with my parents, in trouble with the church, in trouble with my community. And so I don't feel like I had a good word said to me about my body until I was in my 40s. And women started going, I wonder if there's a different way we can consider this. So that has been very recent work in my adult life. And I'm finding the reversal incredibly restorative and also so very hard.
The a second thread that runs throughout your narrative is the truth and seeking to acknowledge the truth. And one of the ways you play this out so much is truth about your marriage, or truth about marriage generally, for all of us now, how hard that is, and truth about your own marriage. And you say at one point that the story of your marriage, you wanted the story of your marriage instead of your marriage. But unpack some of that for us about how coming to terms with acknowledging truth was such a significant development in your recent story.
That took me a couple of years. Thank goodness I did not write this book 3 years ago. It's been 5 years, and I needed every day of that. Initially, right after the discovery process blew up my life and my marriage, and it was an overnight ending. There wasn't a long, drawn out, let's see if we can sort this out. It was a very brief moment of possibility, and then that was very quickly put to bed. And so for a minute, particularly that first year when everything was so chaotic and devastating and shocking still, when I was also having to like claw my way out of toward financial independence, I had kids here. I had 2 kids in high school. I'm parenting them and it's COVID. So it was just such an overwhelming year. And so I think that year, my preferred version of the story was very stereotypical and tidy, villain victim. This person made all these choices, blew up our marriage. This was done to me. I'm innocent. He's the villain. That got me through the day. And of course, that's what everybody else was telling me. So it was a very like agreed upon storyline. But I took myself immediately to therapy because I was so sunk. And therapists are the worst. I don't know if that is, if I'm the only one who knows it. But, I went to therapy so she could just tell me how terrible a person he was and how sad it was that he was mean to such a nice girl like me. And of course, they're just fixated on your own deal and your patterns and your impulses. And so forced into a much higher degree of self-awareness as I began really getting honest with myself. That it had to start there. And went, all right, let me examine my complicity here. After 26 years, that's a long time together. Where did I contribute to the disconnection? Where were the parts of our marriage that just constantly were rubbing and we just could not get it right? Like, what did I put into the soup pot that was complicit to what became a failing marriage? And, those questions I began to answer with truthfulness. So at this point, it's not to say that's not an excuse for betrayal. It is not an excuse that my ex-husband had a whole second life that I had no idea about. That is still a terrible way to lose a marriage, and I am not saying that I deserved it. So I'm careful to get that not out of balance. But I am able now to say, we were in trouble. Like, we were in trouble. I knew it. Like, going back to our original line of discussion, which was sort of intuition, my body knew. My body was like, red flag. Like, I had so many red flags flying. Something was so clearly wrong. And I was like, I am not interested in facing that. I don't want to know what's on the other side of those questions. I don't want to know it. As you mentioned, I want the story of my marriage, not my actual marriage. And so the truth is that we had a really hard 2 years. And we had lost the threads of like respect and connection that keeps any marriage on the rails. And that's just true. And so it's hard to admit that because at first, at least, I felt like that was me offering absolution for unforgivable behavior. But that's not actually true. What it is just honest, because wherever I go, there I am. So if I am unwilling to examine my own patterns, which include codependency, it includes an avoidant attachment style, which means when I feel threatened, when I am in conflict, I go quiet. I recede, I withdraw, and which is just actually a form of control. I am trying to control the scenario with a lack of engagement. That's mine. So I'm either going to address that or I'm going to walk that straight into my next relationship. I'm going to continue those patterns with my children, with my friends, with my family members. And so I did get the gift of self-examination. And I hope that I've been honest about what I have faced and am still facing.
Mm-hmm. I've used for years an essay from theologians Stanley Hauerwas and David Burrell, in which they talk about self-deception, and I've always found it to be really a fascinating article, and they claim that self-deception, they say, requires a policy of a refusal to give an account for some part of one's life.
It's a great definition.
Yeah, that's. I was just wondering. Do you think that how do you respond to that, given some of your experience there with not wanting to look at that part of your life?
Feels so relatable. So relatable.
Yeah.
It's always been really important to me to protect my belonging in the community, to be good. Being good was one of the top rungs of the ladder. My behavior needed to be good. My integrity needed to be good. I've always felt like I needed to be unimpeachable. That the way God felt about me particularly depended on how good or not good I was. And then, of course, we've got this actual community that is willing to be punitive if your behavior falls outside the lines of good. So being good has always felt urgent to me. It felt necessary. That's where my value would come from. That's a mirror of my worth. And anything outside of being good just felt catastrophic to me. And I did not know how to handle that, and I did not know how to manage the weight of that feeling. And so that is a great enemy of self-awareness. When you have to be good to belong, then you don't want to face your own demons. You don't want to face your own unhealthy patterns. I certainly didn't. What would that mean for me? What then would I have to reckon with? What would I be left with if I was that transparent and truthful about my own failures, like the own sort of garbage parts of my personality and behaviors? And that felt scary. To me, that felt too consequential.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to get there. And
it's almost like faith, or maybe more specifically, that kind of faith sets oneself up to be duplicitous, in the sense that
yes.
you have much more at stake in acknowledging your failures, right? You have much more at stake in letting people see that you're not all that.
That's right.
Whereas someone who doesn't have that kind of faith, or doesn't have faith, they don't have anything at stake in that, and actually have less boundaries to being more honest and transparent about themselves.
I think that's a great analysis, and I think that's true. And that is reinforced by what we observe and our experiences, because trust me, I have watched plenty of faith leaders or people in a really visible space falter or fail, and the community is unkind. So it's real. Like, it's not an imagined concern that misbehavior will threaten your belonging. It will. And we've seen it happen more times than we can ever count. And so I think that's also why we end up seeing such just a devastating consistency of really well-known, prominent faith leaders living a dark, private, secret life, because they're not involved in a community that would welcome their struggles or their humanity, certainly not their failures. And so thus, we see it, to your good point, it sets people up to be duplicitous. And I think evidence of that is everywhere.
The whole structure of your memoir, I would think in some ways might be characterized as one way to think about grief, kind of the first initial overwhelm of this horrific loss that unsettles everything, and then these waves of forward, backward, and the different shape the forward and the backward might take. But what would you say you've learned about grief, or the process of grief, over the last 5 years?
Oh boy. I structured Awake. It's not in chapters, as you know. It's written in vignettes, which I wrote each of those in first person in real time. And so it's just in sections. The first section is called The End. and then we have the middle, and then the last third is called the beginning. And the end, the first third, and a big chunk of the middle were the moments and the memories and the small experiences of grief. Boy, that was so painful to write. It was so hard to go back and pull all of those moments back out and just lay them on the page. It's not a prescriptive book. This is not how to get a divorce, or it's not prescriptive at all. I don't actually offer commentary to any of the moments. I tell them as if I experienced them that day. And then I'm going to let the reader decide what they would like to do with that. But the grief part was new to me. Again, I'm sorry, this is because you're a good interview. You started us with embodiment, and so much of this links back to that, including grief. My body is the way that I was finally able to process grief. I was trying to work it out in my brain with my thoughts. Let me think my way into healing. Not even to healing. God, that felt so impossibly far away at the beginning. I didn't even know if I'd ever get there, but I thought, let me think my way to analyze how on earth this happened. How did I get here? I had all the tools. I followed all the scripts. We did all the things. We absolutely nailed the template. And here we still are. Let me see if I can analyze it. And I just couldn't do it. Everything was too traumatic. And so it was actually my body in which I finally experienced grief, when I just bypassed my mind entirely and let my body howl with sorrow. And I did not try to fix that or tamp that down. I didn't set a timer. You can cry for 10 minutes. And I let my body just feel every bit of pain that I was actually feeling. And I let it, I learned, this was through therapy and through teachers and healers and body experts. It took a village to teach me how to be in my body for grief. But I did learn how to stop resisting it. All I'd ever done is resist hard feelings. I am bad at hard feelings. That is not my best category, which made me a hard partner. If you are unable to face pain, discomfort, disagreement, whatever it is, just clear-eyed and with truthfulness, with candor, you are a very difficult partner to work with. You can never get anywhere. You can't ever get to resolution. You can't resolve a difference of opinion. You can't hear each other. There's just nothing to stick to. And so I've been such a lifelong pain resistor, talking myself right out of it. No, we don't have time for that. You think about the good things, this sort of toxic positivity, just to pull myself up and over that mountain that I did not want to actually climb. And so it was my body actually feeling feelings, actually crying tears, actually screaming out loud, without any resistance on my part. My teachers taught me, go really soft, go as soft as you can, release your forehead and your jaw, your shoulders, unclench your hands. And every time I would go through that body Rolodex, everything was as tight as it could possibly be. I was levitating practically off my chair. I was so clenched. And so learning the practice of going really soft, going really gentle, letting feelings come, knowing that they will go and I will live, was a revelation, an absolute revelation. And it was really that practice that I think finally began the uptick of healing for me.
Mm. The next question I'm going to ask, the way I'm going to ask it relates to what we talked about earlier with regard to patriarchalism, purity culture, and certain gendered stereotypes. And I appreciated that you alluded to the difficulty and the pain and the damage even that all that does also to boys and to men.
That's right.
But because the next question I'm going to ask, I was going to first qualify it with the qualifier, I can be sentimental or I can be overly sensitive. And and as even as I was writing my question, I thought that's just yielding to all that kind of stuff. So with all that said, I want to put it this way. I cried when I read your chapter on Dr. Amati. And I think I cried because I could relate to, in that chapter, the grief of caring for one's child, while you're also dealing with your own grief and loss. But that was just such a beautiful kind of moment where I heard him saying to you this invitation again to accept that we are embodied creatures, and you can only take so much so long, and then at some point you just have to love yourself enough to say, okay, I've got to figure out how to take care of myself. But I don't know, any thoughts about that scene or what I just shared there?
Thank you so much for just sharing that. That is, when I think about Dr. Amati, my heart is so full of love and gratitude. And for everybody listening, this was a moment in the story in which my psyche and body broke essentially on the same day that my daughters did. And we were just in such trouble. Our year had just been so traumatic. And she ended up in the care of helpers and doctors. And the second I knew she was safe, my body fell apart. My mom and sister had to come pick me up and take me to the emergency room. And I found myself in the care of an angel, Dr. Amati, who just was so gentle with me. My blood pressure, I was on the verge. I was a disaster. I was in trouble. And he was so gentle and just said, your body's done all it can do. Like, she carried you this far and she got you through the worst of it. And she's run on fatigue for too long and pain. And it's time to care for your body now in the way that you've tried to be caring for everybody else in this story for a year. It had been a year. And that was the day, with that amount of compassion, that was the day that I went on blood pressure medicine. That is the day that I went on antidepressants. That is the day that I was handed anti-anxiety meds as needed. And he said to me, it's time to pull yourself out of the arena. Like, this is imperative. And that really and truly was the pivot moment, in which I just surrendered and went, I cannot white knuckle this thing anymore. I can't achieve my way out of this. I cannot work hard enough to make us healthy and whole. And I just laid it down and went, okay, whatever it takes to get my beloved daughter healthy and well and stable, and for me. And that summer, we both recovered. As you remember, that was the very ending vignette that I included in the middle section. And then thus, after that, started the beginning, when we finally, the sun started to rise for us again.
You mentioned a moment ago codependency, and throughout, again, this is another kind of important thread, I think, throughout your memoir. But for those who are unfamiliar, first maybe give us your working definition of codependency, and then some of the things you began to learn about that.
Yeah, oh gosh. I did not know what that meant at the beginning of this season of life. Brene Brown told me, you need to get the book Codependent No More. That's going to be your Bible. Trust me, you need it. And I remember thinking, God, that can't be right. I thought codependent meant like really needy, or like very meek. Somebody who just had no mind of their own at all. Or I don't know what I thought I meant. But I was like, well, that is not my deal. Codependent, until I started reading that book. And I mean, talk about an indictment. So essentially, and this is such a reductionist definition, so my apologies to everyone who could do this much better than me. But codependency is this misunderstanding that I am responsible for, in charge of, or in some way able to control anybody else's. Anything. Feelings, behaviors, responses, choices, any of it. That is my space, my place to exert control over what it is that they are doing. And then the reverse, the way that comes back is that codependency means whatever they are choosing, I am allowing that to deeply, deeply affect me, which is why codependents are marked by an insatiable, endless victimization. Because it just keeps you there. It keeps you in this perpetual state of anxiety and victimization. I know what's best. I'm telling you how to behave better. You won't do it. Your bad choices are thus affecting me and everybody else. And here goes the cycle. The cycle of just of endless dysfunction. And so when I realized that, I had to reckon with the fact that I had been codependent my entire marriage. That I was, for 26 years, telling him how to behave, how not to behave, how to respond, how to do whatever I thought he was doing poorly better. And then when he still just did what he wanted, because he's a human and that's how it works. We all just do what we want. We live our own lives, turns out. And we make our own choices, turns out. When I didn't like how that was going or it affected other people in our ecosystem, then because I'm codependent and I wanted to manage outcomes, I would go to that person or those people and fix it. Like whatever that meant. I would polish it up. I would shine it up. I would razzle dazzle the experience. And I think the way that I wrote about it was I would try to rearrange the molecules so that that person wasn't experiencing what they were actually experiencing. So as you might imagine, this is not a useful way of being in a relationship with anybody. And so I started learning about codependency in the context of the loss of my marriage, as I was like, I got to figure out my contributions, and faced my own very toxic codependent behavior all those years. But then I was like, oh, damn it. Oh my God, those behaviors I exhibit with my kids. I have some of that with my friends. I have done that with my sisters, because a codependence work, if you are codependent, you are, and it's your problem and it's yours to fix. And it's not somebody else's fault. That was my favorite thing, was to say, I would have so much more peace in my life if you would behave better. If you acted better, then I would not have to do all this labor of like instructing you on how to behave and then fixing all this mess you make. Anyway, that's not how it works. Just spoiler alert, it doesn't work. So if anybody wants to try on codependency, it's like 0 stars, okay? Not useful.
Yeah, I certainly have found Melody Beatty's book, Codependent No More, immensely helpful in working through so much of that. So thank you for that description. And, and I think of kind of her prescription as, in effect, this invitation to take all that energy that I might be expending upon attending to other people and instead take responsibility for my own life and totally. and just say, okay, I'm responsible. And you have at some point a line where you're talking about some of this where you say that you heard someone say, the trauma someone else created is not your fault, but dealing with it is your responsibility, which I think is a beautiful way to kind of capture that, right? Is that, yeah, stuff happens. And then there's the question of, what am I going to do? I can't fix it. I can't control other people, but I do have a responsibility even for attending to the way I am going to respond to this situation in which I find myself. So I find that super helpful, and a hard process, right?
Oh my God, it's terrible. I'd much rather control other people than worry about myself. So 100%.
Yeah. How do you think codependency for you is or is not related to unhelpful definitions of love?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think codependency has the capacity to absolutely sabotage love. In fact, it is love's enemy. And I've seen that in my own life. And so love in its pure form honors the autonomy of another human person. Love says, you matter, and your agency over your own feelings and your desires, that matters. You count, and I will love you. I will love you as you are. That is the person I will love. That's not to say that we don't also, have challenging conversations and we work out dynamics, but codependency is the opposite of that. It is the opposite. It is saying, I'm so unhappy with pieces of you. I hate them so much that I am going to make our relationship a living hell by trying to control everything that you do. And so it's no mystery that you walk that all the way out to the end of the pier and that relationship is in trouble. And so I think there's a difference between codependent behavior, which is about control, and then just good communication, which is about, we're having a difference here. Let's see if we can find resolution because we're on the same team. And we have the same goal, which is to remain connected. That is a completely different energy. It's a completely different approach than codependency, which is about control and then ultimately punishment. If you don't do what I want, I will punish you with either, it just depends on what your personality is. For me, it was with withdrawal. I will punish you I will remove myself from connection so that you will know how much I disapprove of what's happening. Terrible way to build a marriage. Terrible way to build any relationship. And so I can't think of a person I know that would not benefit from doing a little bit of homework around codependency. I think it's pretty insidious and a virus that most of us are infected with to some degree or another.
Yeah. Last piece here, as we move toward a close, I'd love to hear you talk more about is that this last thread that I was especially taken with the kind of a move towards friendship with yourself. And you say at one point early on, I've functionally been my own meanest critic as long as memory serves. And yet in time, you began to move toward first a sort of tentative trust of yourself, and then in time, a sort of real loving friendship with yourself. So, as we think about that construct, what are key moments, key insights that helped you move in that regard?
That's a real slow turning ship. That is not an overnight shift. That it takes a while to get that perspective all the way down into your bone marrow. When you have been like me, and I think this is some environment and some just how I am, who I am as a person, which is hard on myself. And my achieving impetus is just so high. And again, I've historically tied my worth, my value to what I am producing in service of other people and what they think of me. Those are my pillars. So it's completely outsourced. I have no agency at all over what I think of me. It's only what do other people think? What am I doing for you? And what's your opinion of that? So that has left me reeling for decades. Because even when that is going well, even when I am performing to everyone's satisfaction, it always feels scary. It's a house of cards that I know that could turn in one day. And it has. I have experienced that. Like, that is easy come, easy go. And so relocating the source internally of friendship, oh my God, it's so stabilizing. It's so stabilizing. It's so generous. I find it incredibly hard. I do not have this lit, by the way. I am learning to apply the same gentleness and kindness and generosity that I can pretty easily apply to other people. That is not a hard reach for me when it comes to you, at all. I am learning how to be that gentle with myself. And this is so crazy. This goes against all my evangelical upbringing, but I'm learning to say to myself, hey, I'm proud of you. You've really done it. You made it. You were a good mom. One of my sons just read Awake a week or two ago. And he came in and he was like, Mom, it's so interesting to read that. He was like, I forgot that you were a person throughout all of that crazy season because you kept our ship so steady. And you were you were our leader, and you pulled us all forward. I forgot that you had feelings and that you were crushed, and so even now because I'm learning to be friendlier to myself, I'm able to go, you did good, kid. You did the best you could. Nope. There was not a handbook for how to respond to that level of betrayal and destruction of your whole family. You did all right. And so that is new. I have never been nice to myself. And so just that teeny little atta-girl. I mean, if I was my therapist, she would be like, let me guess, you want me to give you credit for that? And I'm like, I do. I'd like that logged in my notes.
They can give us credit sometimes.
Thank you. I've been trying to win therapy now for 5 years.
This has all been a lovely conversation, and I'm so grateful for your willingness to share this with us and to share your journey and the moving and your own self-introspection and your own self-questioning and in light of the trauma. And we're grateful for it.
Thank you.
And
thank you. What a nice thing to say. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate you reading it. Your genuine response to it means a lot to me. I'm not going to forget that. What you said, particularly about Dr. Amati. And so thank you for kind of reflecting that back to me. And I'm glad that meant something to you. And I'm glad to be here and with your listeners. Really grateful.
Thank you, Jen. All the best. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.